1 minute until showtime. Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests. He took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. By some, he's been called controversial. How can I convince you when you're eager to hear? You're turning your heart away from me each time when I draw near. Your eyes begin to meet with my face like the way you cheer.
Now, keep in mind that some of my guests have been approached by Homeland Security or FBI saying, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show? My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something. We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas. Catch the Free American weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger that's inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to have the moon out, the sky is up for sun. For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American. I'm your host. I am Clay Douglas. And it was 21 years ago that I, along with millions of other Americans, sat and watched a government agency, the BATF, attacked a church and killed 17 little children and their parents and their families. I never got a good answer to that. And I was so outraged living in Florida and watching this happen in my home state of Texas that I swore I could not sit back and watch something like that happen again. So
I took action. I started this radio show. I started the Free American magazine. And I started the militia, which I was immediately attacked by a well-funded group of Jewish people called the ADL and Southern Poverty Law. I was even working with presidential candidates in the Republican Party, the first one to sign up for the Republican Party, because he wanted to restore constitutional money. Still got a $5 bill in my pocket, in my wallet, called the United States note with a red seal on it, not a green seal, issued in 1964. It was for this they killed Kennedy, and I was there in the outskirts, 30 miles away when they killed him. My friends were sitting on, my friend, Galen Dougherty, was sitting on the bridge, over the railroad bridge over Elm Avenue, and saw the shooters. So we knew from the get-go that the government and the press and the media was lying. There was not a single shooter. It was not Lee Harvey Oswald. I even got to meet his wife, Marina, a few years back when I put on an expo in Texas. And I've been the bearer of bad news. I've been the, and as well as being demonized and for talking about the Jewish connection, by talking about the media, by talking about the Federal Reserve, and pointing out that the CIA, BATF were working for the banksters, not working for the American people. Well, finally, there's some good news. And this comes from my regular on my show is John Kaminsky, and he has started up a website called Renegade Tribune. Kind of partial that too, because one of my magazines, one of my motorcycle magazines, was called Renegade Express. Renegade Exchange. Now the good news, that widespread loathing at the politicization of Western news contents is driving tens of millions to alternative news sources. The British Bias Corporation, BBC, recently dumped yet another 1,000 staff in the wastebasket, and the U.S. is not doing any better. An independent survey reveals that 82% of Fox News information is dishonest. U.S. newspaper revenue has fallen 19.6%, and there's been a 34.5% decline in advertising income. Can you join with me? In the U.S. news media, shed 20% of its journalists. A graph shows a drop from 66 billion to 19 billion currently. CNN, Fox, and MSNBC are stunned at a further 19% drop in viewing figures. The unstoppable decline in advertising fees is equal to the loss of mind control. Newspapers have cut staff by 1/3. The German, French, Spanish media, in line with other EU states, are losing a once loyal readership and broadcasting audience. Economist Dr. Gerard Francis Lemurio says, "I believe the year 2015 is the year that America will witness the end of the mainstream media. However, figures for those switching to alternative media such as Renegade Broadcasting and red ice for their alternative news balance rises like a helium-filled balloon. Serious news content harvesting is up by a whacking 63% on social media. Pinterest and Tumblr saw the largest increase of 97 and 95% respectively. Only Facebook lost ground, but now tries to recover the situation by focusing more on news contents. And more good news emerges from Absurdistan, aka the United Kingdom. There are 52 newspapers closed in 2009, and the decline has accelerated since. 1 in 10 UK print publications will cut frequency of publication in half, publish online only, or clear their desks. Daily Mail sales have plummeted 25% since 2010. The group's debt rose by £199 million to 722 million euros. If the Daily Mail, with a 25% drop in readers, is anxious, think of the fear from 10 other UK mainstream media whose failing circulation figures is far worse. The average year-on drop is 10%. The Daily Telegraph suffered a cataclysmic 40.6% drop in readers. The Times is down by an eye-watering 35.5%. Financial Times readership is down 51%. This decline is likely to have since accelerated on account of the emerging English language Russian media with its far superior coverage. Heil the Banana Republic. Udo Olcott, former Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung editor, has broken ranks. He says, "I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I've been educated to lie, to betray, and not tell the truth to the public. The German and American media tries to bring war to the people in Europe, to bring war to Russia. This is a point of no return, and I am going to stand up and say it is not right what I've done in the past to manipulate people to make propaganda against Russia, that it is not right what my colleagues do and have done in the past, because they are bribed to betray the people, not only in Germany, but all over Europe. I'm very fearful of a new war in Europe. I don't like to have this situation again, because war is never coming from itself. There's always people who push for war, not only politicians, but it is journalists too. We have betrayed our readers just to push for war. I don't want this anymore. I'm fed up with this propaganda. We live in a banana republic and not a democratic country where we have press freedom. The German media, especially my colleagues, day by day, write against the Russians. These journalists who are in transatlantic organizations and who are supported by the United States to do so. It seems the Germans are waking up to there being an American colony. Der Spiegel has lost 14.6% of its traffic over the course of 2014. As Spiegel's bias has made itself evident, German readership began an exodus, resulting in a nearly 20% drop over the course of 5 months. Right, let's see what else we've got on this Renegade Tribune. Rothschild's monster. Kill, kill, kill. See the most racist, murderous, terrorist state on earth. This Zionist creation steals and terrorizes and kills. Those Rothschilds monsters. All Americans are accessories to mass murder all over the world. Be like most Americans. You don't need to pay attention to the wars. They aren't shooting at you yet. Go back to worrying about your ball game. So you lose a few of your children. Big deal. You voted for a string of killers who have murdered millions of people who they knew were innocent. And every single one of those corpses was a result that you enabled because you voted for them. Take responsibility. Taste the blood in your throat. One day it will likely be your own, and many of those people you thought were telling you the truth will chuckle at your fatal gullibility as they count the cash they won by your cynical complicity. The thing you might want to think about is that not one of those people ever murdered by the obese American war machine was ever any threat to the United States. They were killed by Americans simply because the Jews wanted them dead, because their very presence somehow interfered with the grand kosher profit strategy. As everyone should know by now, Americans are totally controlled by Jews who have the strings to our money bags tightly wrapped around our throats and our politicians' testicles. Toward the end of World War II, General George S. Patton realized that he had helped defeat the wrong enemy. We have destroyed, he said, what could have been a good race, and we are about to replace them with Mongolian savages. Actually, the Germans are the only decent people left in Europe. It's a choice between them and the Russians. I prefer the Germans. So you can see why the Jews had to kill Patton. He didn't want to give half of Europe to the Jews, who had stolen Russia and turned it into the Soviet Union, still arguably the greatest mass murderer of all times, despite current efforts by the United States to surpass the Soviet achievement. And he didn't understand, as most Americans don't understand today, that he was working for the Jews from the get-go. When you control the money supply, you control everyone's minds, properties, and efforts. As the great American war hero of World War II, who was murdered by his superiors when he revealed the mistake his country had made, what might Patton have thought about today's disgusting events with the American serial invasions of defenseless countries whose resources it brazenly steals? As Obama told the Russians, you don't like us taking Syria? Well, we'll take the Ukraine instead. I don't think it was ever Patton's intention to make war against every country in the world until it was too late and the war was over. I don't think Patton ever realized that the U.S. was doing the Jews' business when it destroyed Germany. I don't think Patton would ever have approved installing Israeli terrorists in the Ukraine to murder innocent men, women, and children while trying to goad Russia into World War III. I find the campaign by the Jewish media to blame Russia for the Ukraine events, well, they were so clearly engineered by Hillary Clinton and her neocon throat cutters to be the most egregious misleading of the American public since the conversion of Hitler from Times Magazine's Man of the Year to the greatest threat ever in world history, all because he circumvented the Jews' worldwide financial tyranny. I don't think Patton would have tolerated the government he worked for hiring bunches of thugs all over the world to serve as convenient foils for his own armed forces to pretend to fight, which is the situation in the Middle East with ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, supposedly a U.S. enemy, that never hurts any Jews but constantly beheads other non-Jewish innocents and are the latest beneficiaries of American military expenditures. It's not such a new thing, you know, for America to support both sides in the same war. We've been sending pallets of cash to Iraq for decades for that very purpose. But no, it's not really the American formula. It's a time-tested Jewish formula to keep the world in disarray, support both sides in any conflict, and profit no matter the result. Americans never wanted to look at all of the innocents we obliterated in Libya, Iraq, or Afghanistan, and are now trying to impose the same formula in Yemen, Iran, and Syria. We see these bleeding bodies lying in the streets and turn our heads away. We don't need to find any new enemies. We simply create them, then shoot them down and call it war. We create them, and the pay is so good that it attracts thrill seekers, malcontents, and outlaws from all over the world to perpetrate atrocities on the unsuspecting. It's not your blood. Why worry about it? All these events are the same event. The same formula of Jewish destabilization template used in every country with the goal of making them all look like Palestine. We've lost our minds and are pointing a gun at our own foreheads, all because we refuse to see the reality that Jewish influence has turned our lives to excrement, and we're not allowed to talk about it. Is it mere stupidity, or a more psychologically complex case of self-deception? The crucial factor by which we have been led by our noses to the doorway of destruction has been the widespread failure to speak candidly about the psychic plague that colors all our lives with a smelly shade of feces brown. The plague the Jews have brought to America, an infection they have spread throughout the rest of the world, is worse than the bubonic plague they brought to Europe. These are the lies we tell ourselves. Jews are merely another ethnic group. This is a big mistake. They are conscienceless vermin who have infected and diminished every aspect of our society. Most people realize they have no leverage with their elected officials, that only money earns them any influence, so the general feeling of the public is, why bother? It will come to nothing. If you don't have the money to buy influence, you have none. This is the noose of our society. With power come lies that are escaped only by bribery. This mental quicksand is the blindness of empire. Americans absolutely do not care that their government lies to them. Things should be becoming clearer, but in reality they're becoming more opaque. Do Americans want to be killers? The evidence says they do. The American government has gone so far overboard into the insanity of unopposed power, and the American people have fallen so deeply into a coma of propagandized indifference that neither can any longer see that their country is sinking into the middle quicksand of believing that they can tell any lie and have it be believed and commit any crime and get away with it. It is nothing but the euphoric drunkenness of the conscienceless conqueror that always precedes the catastrophic destruction of an empire with no scruples. In a psychotic scenario that could never have been predicted, the United States is involved in so many military adventures simultaneously that it is absolutely impossible It's okay. Okay, I'll go to Midland with you. Okay.
After the show.
Okay, I'll be ready. Let me repeat this, folks. I mean, you know, you've been led by the mainstream media, the Jewish-controlled media, to think I'm dangerous. Well, I am. To them. It's real simple with me. I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There was no expiration date on that oath. And unlike the Jewish-run Oath Keepers, the oath I took is real, and I've been trying to save you from another Waco, to educate you that the enemy is within. The enemy is within the gates. The enemy is next door to you, and they're selling this country out. Hollywood is selling you out. The television is selling you out. The radio is selling you out. They're working for someone else. Because I tell you the truth, I can't get advertising. They will go to every advertiser. If I put them on my site, they will go to that advertiser and tell them, "Oh, he's anti-Semitic. You don't want to support him. You don't want to have anything to do with him. Man, he's a dangerous guy. He started the militia. Don't you know he started the militia?" Yeah, I didn't start ISIS. I didn't start Al-Qaeda. I didn't start any of that. I started the Free American, and I've tried to tell you the truth. Hello, Saturday Night here. Hello, David. And let me tell you in the guest room, if you don't want to pay attention to what I'm telling you, you don't want to support me, then get the hell out of my chat room, turn off the radio, don't come around anymore. And if I see anybody talk about Planet X or anything else or the moon exploding, I'll kick you off of my goddamn site and you'll never come on again. Do I make myself really clear? I hope so. I want listeners, I want supporters. But if you wanna go off into left field and you don't want to talk about what's really the problem here, the Jews are really our problem. The New World Order is really our problem. And I'm real serious about this. Alright. Yeah, let me look here. Where was I? So do Americans want to be killers? The evidence says they do. Americans absolutely do not care that their government lies to them. And I told you that about 9/11. I told you it was an exaggerated case of Jewish lightning, and they tried to kill me, and none of you helped. None of you came to me. None of you recognized that I told you the truth about 9/11. And the American government has gone so far overboard into the insanity of unopposed power, and the American people have fallen so deeply into a coma of propagandized indifference that neither can any longer see that their country is sinking into a mental quicksand of believing they can tell any lie and have it be believed, and commit any crime and get away with it. In a psychotic scenario that could never have been predicted, the United States is involved in so military adventures simultaneously, it's absolutely impossible to tell which wars are actually real and which military provocations are merely staged dramas where the stated facts supposedly justifying these vast expenditures for armaments and these truly stunning totals of innocent people who are murdered to make all the false claims appear real are impossible to tell apart with the possibility that none of the wars are real and that all are creations of those soulless drecks who sell weapons and keep the world bleeding for that very purpose and none other. So far overboard into the insanity of unopposed power, like an abusive father who's raping his children and has the protection of the local police who will not investigate his crimes, the U.S. government sends troops overseas on a whim to alleviate the insecurities of the oil companies who fear their investments will falter. The first and biggest lie is that the victor can stop after his conquest. The victor never stops until he is stopped by any method possible. Only the people rising up can defeat the tyrant. The second biggest lie is that once the first lie is established and not debunked, it affects the entire future until the whole complex is finally overturned, if it ever is. It changes the whole nature of history that follows. This is the legacy of 9/11, the world wars, the Jewish takeover of America in 1913. All these events helped create a world totally controlled by the Jews. Probably the stupidest people, the most delusional, are those who defend Jews just like another ethnic group. These people don't have the intestinal fortitude to admit Jews control every aspect of their life and have ruined every tradition they ever thought was decent. As a result, they can't see that every future presidential candidate they hear being discussed is either a signee or a fervent supporter of the group that gave us the PNAC report, the Project for the New American Century, which was the cabal that gave us 9/11 and all the wars. Until we break this Jewish media mind lock, we can expect nothing but deception, death, and destruction from the very country that once, long ago, was thought to be the hope of the world, but has now become its worst nightmare. Admit your guilt, that you are part of the problem, because Americans simply do not care whom they kill. And to say anything else or to protest that you're not a part of it is simply another lie. And it looks like I'm losing people out of the chat room because they want to talk about something other than listen to me. People that I thought were my friends are basically abandoning the ship here. And I'm tired of it. No, Planet X is not discussed here. All right. Let's see what else we've got. Trying to get Dr. Michael Sawa on my show. Send him a email. And what else? Andrew Carrington Hitchcock. I like it, what he puts up first, and this is a man that has discussed the Jews. Hard to find his books, but he's got a website up, Andrew Carrington Hitchcock. And he talks about the Holocaust or Holohoax. You be the judge. He says in this article, I'm going to prove to you why, amongst other things, you have Holocaust denial laws today, and what it was that caused these laws to be enacted. But first, let's start in 1919, when an early incarnation of the Holocaust of 6 million Jews is reported by former governor of New York, Martin H. Glenn, in the American Hebrew magazine. This Holocaust of 6 million Jews in Romania, Poland, and the Ukraine clearly doesn't receive the publicity required, and it quietly disappears from history. However, Martin Glenn's unsubstantiated and abandoned claims certainly prove influential, as 10 separate Holocausts of 6 million Jews are reported in various newspapers between 1915 and 1938. You can see the stories from each of these newspapers in the YouTube video that we've got here. We'll see if it'll translate from the video to the audio here. Matter of fact, I'll even copy the embed code. 6 million Jews, 1950 to 1938, 10 newspapers. The Sun, New York, June 6, 1915.
Hi, he has 10 newspapers where these Jews are pushing a 6 million figure between the years of 1915 and 1938. The first newspaper is The Sun of New York. New York, June the 6th, 1915. That is The Sun. It's the first page of the 5th section that I want. There we go. The Sun, it's a bit ripped around there, it's all come off a bit. The 5th section is the front page. And the article is called Horrors Worse in Kishinev, Charged Against Russia Today. And there's the big article, takes up most of the page. So go in, yeah, go. Since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the Jewish people have had no darker page in their history than that which the Russian government is writing today. 6 million Jews, one half of the Jewish people throughout the world, are being persecuted, hounded, humiliated, tortured, starved. Thousands of them have been slaughtered. Hundreds of thousands of Jews, old men, women and children, are being driven mercilessly from town to town. There it is, people. 6 million Jews. One half of the Jewish people throughout the world are being persecuted, hounded, humiliated, tortured and starved. As I go along here, support here as well. Dear brethren, have mercy on the 6 million Jews in Russia and take our part. Again, 6 million Jews in Russia. 6 million. This is in an article entitled Horrors Worse in Kishinev, Charged Against Russia Today. That's in The Sun of New York, Sunday, June the 6th, 1915. This is 18 years before Hitler ever set foot in the government. 18 years.
New York Times, October 18th, 1918. I mean, are you starting to realize how
This is the next
badly you've been
newspaper.
conned?
The New York Times again. It's from 1918. There it is. The New York Times. October the 18th, 1918. It's page 12 that I want. There we go. Page 12. Page 12. The New York Times, October 18th, 1918. And the article is called $1 billion Fund to Rebuild Jewry. There it is. 6 million souls will need help to resume normal life when war is ended. 6 million souls. As I go down the article here, here's again. 6 million Jews need help. 6 million. 6 million Jews need help. There's an article called $1 billion Fund to Rebuild Jewry. That is in the New York Times, October the 18th, 1918. There's the next newspaper. This is New York Times again. The New York Times, September the 8th, 1919. It's page 6 that I want. There we go. Page 6. Page 6. The New York Times, September the 8th, 1919. And the article is called Ukrainian Jews Aim to Stop Pogroms. Mass meeting hears that 127,000 Jews have been killed and 6 million are in peril. 6 million. As I go down the article, there it is. We come out now before the world with a determined slogan, those pogroms must stop, said the President in his annual message. It is only a question of holding these facts continually before the civilized world. We must not permit the world to slumber. This fact that the population of 6 million souls in Ukraine and in Poland have received notice through action and by word that they are going to be completely exterminated. You literally cannot make this up. 6 million souls completely exterminated. 6 million. There's an article called Ukrainian Jews Aim to Stop Pogroms in the New York Times, September the 8th, 1919. This is 13 and a half years before Hitler came to power.
New York Times, November 12th, 1919.
This is the next newspaper. This is the New York Times again. The New York Times, the date, November the 12th, 1919. It's page 7 that I want on here. There you go. Page 7 in the New York Times, November the 12th, 1919. The article is called 10 tells sad plight of Jews. Felix M. Warburg says they were the worst sufferers in the war. There it is here. The successive blows of contending armies have all but broken the back of the European Jewry, he said, and have reduced to tragically unbelievable poverty, starvation and disease about 6 million souls, or half the Jewish population of the earth. 6 million. 6 million souls, or half the Jewish population of the earth. I'll go further down the article so you can read the rest of it. There is again, people, unbelievable poverty, starvation and disease, about 6 million souls, or half the Jewish population of the earth. An article entitled "Tell Sad Plight of Jews" in the New York Times, November the 12th, 1919.
You need to think about that.
This is the next newspaper. It's the Atlanta Constitution from 1920. February 23rd, 1920. The article's on the front page here. It's called $50,000 raised in city to save suffering Jews. And it goes along the bottom. Continued on page 3, column 4. So I'll go to page 3. There we go. Constitution Atlanta, February 23rd, 1920. There it is. $50,000 raised to save suffering Jews. Continued from first page. I'll go down. He called upon the Atlanta Jews to arise to the occasion and to contribute to the emergency fund in order that the lives of 6 millions of Jewish people may be saved. 6 millions of Jewish people may be saved. I'll go further down. Rabbi Mark speaks. Rabbi Marx made an eloquent plea for generous responses to the call of the representatives of the Jewish Relief Fund. He drew a graphic picture of the starvation and suffering of the 6 million Jews who live in Eastern Europe and Palestine. 6 million Jews. Thousands upon thousands of our people have died of starvation and pestilence, and thousands more will die, he said. There it is, people. 6 million Jews. In an article entitled $50,000 raised to save suffering Jews in the Constitution of Atlanta, February 23rd, 1920.
Now, the New York Times, May 7th, 1920.
This is the next newspaper. This is the New York Times. This is from 1920. There we go. The New York Times. The date, Friday, May the 7th, 1920. It's page 11 that I want. There we go. Page 11. Page 11. The article is called "The Jewish War Aid Gets $100,000 Gift." There it is. The Fund for Jewish War Sufferers in Central and Eastern Europe, where 6 millions face horrifying conditions of famine, disease and death, was enriched yesterday by a contribution of $100,000 from Nathan Strauss. There's 6 millions. There's horrifying conditions of famine, disease and death. 6 millions. There's horrifying conditions of famine, disease and death. I'll just go down the rest of the article if anybody wants to read it. There's an article called Jewish War Aid Gets $100,000 Gift in the New York Times, Friday, May the 7th, 1920.
New York Times, July 20th, 1921.
There's the New York Times again. This is 1921. There you go. New York Times, Wednesday, July the 20th, 1921. It's page 2 that I want. There we go. Page 2. Page 2. New York Times, July 20th, 1921. And the article is called Begs America, Save 6 Million in Russia. Massacre threatens all Jews as Soviet power wanes, declares Kreinin, coming here for aid. Look at that. Russia's 6 million Jews are facing extermination by massacre. As the famine is spreading, the counter-revolutionary movement is gaining, and the Soviet control is waning. Now this is one of the biggest articles a lot. This is 1921, 12 years before Adolf Hitler ever set foot in the government. Look at that. Russia's 6 million Jews are facing extermination by massacre. That's an article entitled Begs America Save 6 Million in Russia on page 2 in the New York Times, Wednesday, July 20th, 1921. This is the Gazette of Montreal. This is 1931. The Gazette, Montreal, Tuesday, December 29th, 1931. This is over a year before Hitler came to power. The Gazette, it's page 6 that I want. There we go. Page 6. Page 6. The Gazette, Montreal, December 29th, 1931. And the article pretty much speaks up for itself. 6 million Jews face starvation. 6 million. Bad conditions in southeastern Europe reported by Rabbi Wise. Fears crisis at hand. 6 million Jews in Eastern Europe face starvation, and even worse, during the coming winter. 6 million Jews. I'll give us a look at the rest of the article. The article is called 6 million Jews face starvation. The Gazette of Montreal, December 29th, 1931. 1.5 years before Adolf Hitler ever set foot in the government. This is the next newspaper. This is the New York Times again. There we go. New York Times, Well, this is dated 1936, Sunday, May the 31st, 1936. This does not say the 6 million Jews, but it does say Holocaust. New York Times. It's page 14 that I want. There we go. Page 14. The New York Times, May the 31st, 1936. And the article is called Americans Appeal for Jewish Refuge. It's quite a big article. But it's along here. Yeah. The petition, in expressing the opinion of enlightened Christian leadership in the United States favouring a larger Jewish immigration into Palestine, stressed the intolerable sufferings of the millions of Jews in the European Holocaust. The European Holocaust in 1936, before the Second World War even started. You go up here, there it is again. Great Britain has it in her power to throw open the gates of Palestine and let in the victimised and persecuted Jews escaping from the European Holocaust. The European Holocaust in 1936, 3.5 years before the Second World War ever even started. That's in an article entitled Americans Appeal for Jewish Refuge, the New York Times, May the 31st, 1936. Here's the next newspaper. This is the New York Times again. New York Times. This is dated February 23rd, 1938. This is before the Second World War started. 40 year and a half. The New York Times. It's page 23 that I want. There you go. Page 23. The New York Times, February 23rd, 1938. And the article is called Jewish Teachers Chided by Isaacs. I'll go along the bottom. And it's a Jewish tragedy pictured. A depressing picture of 6 million Jews in Central Europe deprived of protection or economical opportunities, slowly dying of starvation, all hope gone, was presented to the teachers by Jacob Tarsus. The Jewish tragedy started when Hitler came into power in 1933. It is again here. 6 million Jews in Central Europe, slowly dying of starvation. 6 million. This is in 1938. Jewish teachers chided by Isaacs. New York Times, February 23rd, 1938. A year and a half before the Second World War even started.
Okay. here. In light of the Nuremberg trials, in which the Nazi confessions are reported worldwide, let's move swiftly forward to January 9th, 1949, in relation to the alleged Nazi confessions at the Dachau trials. The Washington Daily News gives an account of the American judge Edward L. Van Roden, in which he describes the methods via which the investigators obtained confessions, as posturing as priests to hear confessions and give absolution, torturing with burning matches driven under prisoners' fingernails, knocking out teeth and breaking jaws, solitary confinement, near starvation rations. The statements, which were admitted as evidence, were obtained from men who had first been kept in solitary confinement for 3, 4, and 5 months. The investigators would put a black hood over the accused's head and punch him in the face with brass knuckles, kick him and beat him with rubber hoses. All but 2 of the Germans, in the 139 cases we have investigated, had been kicked in the testicles beyond repair. This was standard operating procedure with our American investigators. The names of some of these so-called American investigators is particularly interesting. Captain Raphael Shoemaker, Lieutenant William R. Pearl, Merle Elowitz, Harry Thorne, Joseph Kirschbaum, and the Chief Dachau War Crimes Branch, Colonel A.H. Rosenfeld. Arthur Butch, in his 1976 seminal work on the alleged Holocaust, the hoax of the 20th century, reports the following interesting extract of these trials. One notable incident occurred when investigator Joseph Kirschbaum brought a certain Einstein into court to testify that the accused Menzel had murdered Einstein's brother. When the accused was able to point out that the brother was alive and well, and in fact sitting in court, Kirschbaum was deeply embarrassed and scolded poor Einstein. "How can we bring this pig to the gallows if you were so stupid as to bring your brother into court?" The U.S. Army authorities in charge admitted some of these things when the chief of the Dachau War Crimes Branch, Colonel A.H. Rosenfeld, quit his post in 1948. He was asked by newspapermen if there was any truth to the stories about the mock trials at which sham death sentence had been passed. He replied, "Well, yes, of course. We couldn't have made these birds talk otherwise. It was a trick and it worked like a charm." Now, as we carry on looking at the work of historical revisionists, we move forward to 1974, when the original expose questioning the official Holocaust narrative, Richard E. Harwood's "Did 6 million really die?" is published, in which he states, "The question most pertinent to the extermination legend is, of course, how many of the 3 million European Jews under German control survived after 1945. The Jewish Joint Distribution Committee estimated the number of survivors in Europe to be only 1.5 million, but such a figure is now totally unacceptable. This is proved by the growing number of Jews receiving compensation from the West German governments for having allegedly suffered between 1939 and 1945. By 1965, the number of claimants registered with the West German government had tripled in 10 years and reached 3,375,000. In all of German-occupied Europe, there resided 2.4 million Jews before the war, according to the World Jewish Encyclopedia. After the war, 3.8 million Jewish Holocaust survivors were receiving pensions from the German government. Tragically, the remaining 66 million were lost. And that by Edgar Steele, who appeared on my show many times, who was also murdered in the jail by his Jewish captors. 2 years later, in 1976, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies applies to get did 6 million really die banned from South Africa, whilst the local distributor S.C.D. Brown tried their best to fight the censorship. Their funds were simply insufficient to mount an appeal against such a well-funded organization. Carrying on with the Holocaust revisionism in his 1978 book, Auschwitz, a judge looks at the evidence. German judge Wilhelm Stalag gave an account of his impressions of the Auschwitz camp in 1944, built based on several visits there whilst he was stationed in the village of Auschwitz nearby. I was in the camp, inside the camp, 3 or 4 times altogether. On none of these visits did I see gassing installations, crematoria, instruments of torture, or similar horrors. On none of my visits did I find that inmates, at least the ones present in the camp, for example, inmates employed in the various workshops of the cleanup detail, were badly, much less inhumanely treated. Finally, I can report that the German residents of Auschwitz were unaware of mass exterminations or other atrocities in the camp. At any rate, they never spoke to me of such things. As an afterthought, I would like to mention the following. In the Dachau concentration camp museum, there's a picture captioned Auschwitz crematoria furnaces. They reminded me of the baking ovens shown us by an inmate working in the camp bakery. And here's a cartoon here. 6 million Jews were gassed behind this door. Not one of them thought to break the glass windows. Moving into 1982, in the summer edition of the Journal of Historical Review, Professor Robert Farrison states, "The truth obliges me to say that the diary of Anne Frank is only a simple literary fraud." He cites evidence in which the structure of the house the family supposedly hid in does not resemble the structure of the house from the diary, and that the 2 forms of handwriting supposedly written by Anne Frank only 4 months apart in no ways resemble each other. And interestingly, on the subject of handwriting, there are parts of the diary that were written in a ballpoint pen, which was not available on the market until long after the end of World War II. In 1984, Toronto, Canada, German publisher Ernst Zundel distributes his own edition of Did 6 Million Really Die? And sends copy to the Canadian members of the Parliament, members of the clergy, journalists, and broadcasters. A year later, Ernst Zundel is subsequently put on trial and sentenced to 15 months imprisonment, followed by an automatic deportation after a complaint under an obscure law prohibiting the publication of false news by a certain Sabrina Citron, who ran an organization called the Holocaust Remembrance Association. The sentence was passed even though both the defense and the prosecution agreed that the bulk of the 6 million really die was correct, and only small points were in dispute. Interestingly, it is subsequently revealed that the law firm of the presiding judge, Hugh Locke, did work for Mr. Citron's Holocaust Remember Association whilst he was a barrister there. Moving forward to February 1988, the first forensic examination of the alleged execution chambers at Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Majdanek is conducted by Fred Lucier and subsequently published as the Lucier Report. Fred Lucier, that's Leuchter, is an engineer who specializes in the design and fabrication of execution hardware used in prisons throughout the United States. Indeed, one of his projects was the design of a new gas chamber at the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson. In essence, Fred Lucier took samples from the walls of the alleged gas chambers and also from the walls of the delousing chambers, so he could compare the claim that rather than Zyklon B being used to gas inmates of the various camps, it was actually used to delouse the inmates' clothing of lice in order to prevent outbreaks of typhus. His results were overwhelming. He could find no trace of Zyklon B in the walls of the alleged gas chambers, yet it was overwhelmingly prevalent in the walls of the delousing chambers where the inmates' clothes were cleansed of lice. I will leave this last word to Mr. Lucier, which I quote from the conclusion of this report, of his report. After reviewing all of the material and inspecting all of the sites at Auschwitz, Birkenau, and Majdanek, your author finds the evidence overwhelming. There were no execution gas chambers at any of these locations. It is the best engineering opinion of this author that the alleged gas chambers at the inspected sites could not have been or now be utilized or seriously considered to function as execution gas chambers. The Lucier report was actually commissioned by Ernst Zundel to act in his defense after his 1985 conviction was overturned by the Ontario Court of Appeal in 1987, and a retrial was ordered to commence on January 1988. Even though Fred Lucier did not question the official Holocaust narrative, Professor Robert Farson, who had taken an interest in the Zundel case and offered his assistance, was confident that an investigation on the basis of Lucier's skills in relation to poison gas and execution chambers would successfully serve as a core of Ernst Zundel's defense. Hello, who are you?
Yeah. Hi, good morning. Is Clay available?
You've got Clay Douglas, and you are on the air since you called in the middle of my radio show.
What happened?
You are on the air. I am broadcasting. I do a radio show for 2 hours every day. So who are you and what do you want? Again, who are you? What do you want? Well, I guess you don't want nothing. All right. Back to this. Despite Fred Lucier's neutral position in questioning the official version of the Holocaust and his evidence based upon the exact science of forensic chemistry, Ernst Zundel was once again found guilty, although this time he was given a 9-month sentence as opposed to the 15-month one he was given previously. And interestingly, he is granted bail after signing a gag order promising not to write or speak about the Holocaust. In 1989, in the former concentration camp of Auschwitz, a plaque claiming that 4 million people had been murdered there, mainly Jews, is replaced by a plaque stating that 1.5 million had died there. Strangely, the figure 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust is not reduced accordingly to reflect this 2.5 million reduction in the stated death toll at Auschwitz, and furthermore, no reason for the reduction in the death toll at Auschwitz, nor the fact that the 6 million figure has not been reduced to reflect this reduction or ever given. I now quote from the book, says Andrew Hitchcock, Synagogue of Satan, updated, expanded, and uncensored. This is this 2012 book. Due to the mass panic among Jewish groups regarding alleged discrepancy in the official version of the Holocaust, they used their influence to ensure France introduces and passes the Graysot Law, making Holocaust denial a crime. The following European countries follow suit: Germany, who had already limited Holocaust denial laws; Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, Romania, Czech Republic, Lithuania, Poland, and Slovakia. This is done to protect the Jews' greatest weapon against those who criticize their criminal actions. The alleged slaughter of 6 million Jews during World War II, a weapon which they used continually to make them appear the unfairly persecuted underdog, and thus justify their oppressive actions against other races. It's also done to protect their Holocaust industry, which generates billions of dollars for them every year in so-called reparations, which will no doubt have to be paid back if the actual facts were revealed regarding this alleged historical event. The Jews' alleged Holocaust is the only historical event that historians have sentenced to jail for researching in so-called free speech countries, which has led to the following unsatisfactory ring-fenced historical conclusions. Exposing the Holohoax is explicitly or implicitly illegal in these 14 countries: Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic, France, Germany, Israel, Liechtenstein, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Poland, Hungary, Portugal, Romania, and Switzerland. It's positively Orwellian. Why make it illegal to question and to investigate and have a different conclusion to a historical event? Since when is it illegal to express a different opinion? The truth doesn't need Orwellian laws, or unending indoctrination to protect it. Elie Wiesel's testimony in his 1966 book, The Jews of Silence, that the blood of Jews murdered by Nazis spurted in geysers out of the ground where they were buried for months afterwards. This cannot be questioned. In Martin Gilbert's testimony in his 1981, Auschwitz and the Allies, that in spring and summer of 1942, hundreds of thousands of Jews were being gassed every day, which is 200,000 a day for 17 weeks, would equal just under 24 million Jews, when figures indicate there weren't that many in the world at the time. This cannot be questioned. In Abraham Bomda's report in the 1985 film Shoah, that he worked in a 4x4 meter barbershop in Treblinka, which somehow accommodated 15 other barbers and 70 to 80 women and children whose hair they cut in 8 minutes before he and the barbers left the room for 5 minutes, while the women and children were gassed and then re-entered with the barbers to repeat the process. Despite the fact the room would still be full of gas, this cannot be questioned. In Arnold Friedman's 1985 testimony at the trial of Ernst Zundel, that one could tell what nationality of Jew was being burned in the ovens by the color of the flames, green for a Polish Jew, blue for a Hungarian Jew, etc., that shot out of the crematorium chimney. This cannot be questioned. Or the claims that Nazis made bars of soap out of their Jewish victims, that Jewish researchers Deborah Lipstadt and Yehudi Bar have since admitted was false. This cannot be questioned. When I put this research together, I missed the vital point here. Why were these laws not introduced earlier? Why are they introduced now? I think the Lucier report is the smoking gun answer to that. It is abundantly clear that as soon as a forensic study was undertaken, showed the claims of poison gassing to be patently false, suddenly laws were popping up all over Europe threatening anyone who questioned the official Holocaust narrative with imprisonment. Basically, the Jews couldn't argue with scientific evidence, so they chose to make the alleged Holocaust the only part of mainstream history you can be prosecuted and jailed for researching, discussing, or disputing. You don't need to make laws to protect history unless you're trying to protect a lie. And now a quote from the 2005 entry into the Synagogue of Satan. On December 5th, the following accusations from Holocaust revisionists that World War II leaders were never mentioned the alleged Holocaust of the Jews in gas chambers. Richard Lynn, professor emeritus at the University of Ulster, reports his research in this matter as follows. I checked out Churchill's Second World War, and the statement is quite correct. Not a single mention of Nazi gas chambers or genocide of the Jews or 6 million Jewish victims of the war. This is astonishing. How can it be explained? Eisenhower's Crusade in Europe is a book with 559 pages. The 6 volumes of Churchill's Second World War totaled 4,448 pages, and de Gaulle's 3-volume Memories de Guerre is 2,054 pages. In this massive writing, which totals 7,061 pages, not including the introductory parts, published from 1948 to 1959, will find no mention of either Nazi gas chambers or a genocide of the Jews or of 6 million Jewish victims. And here's a sign of the Holocaust Cult Church. Believe in our hoax, share it. Did 6 million die? We give no proof, but we're Jews. Everybody believes us. Where the hoax is on you. This should come as no surprise to Professor Lynn, as even the most liberal of readers cannot explain why, as I've already mentioned, the 2.5 million reduction of the 4 million dead to 1.5 million at Auschwitz in 1989 is never deducted from the 6 million Jews alleged to die in the Holocaust. Here are some of the other facts the Jews have never explained regarding the Holocaust they allege happened to 6 million of their brethren in World War II. The World Almanac and Book of Facts for 1945 estimate that in 1939 the population of Jews in the world was 15,688,259, which in 1945 had decreased to 15,162,089. This is a decrease of only 496,170, not 6 million. And by the way, the almanac source for these figures is the American Jewish Committee. Furthermore, the number of Jews in Europe in 1939 is shown as 8,939,608, and in 1945, 9,372,066, which is a population increase of 422,058 after the alleged Holocaust of 6 million. Despite these official figures, if this did not stop nearly 4 million Jews for applying for reparations from Germany after the war, which begs the question, if this many Jews suffered at the hands of Germany during the war and survived, how many did the Germans actually kill? I cannot see how the Jews can have it both ways, but as pointed out by another prominent researcher into this intrigue, there's no business like Shoah business. If Zyklon B gas was used to kill Jews in gas chambers, why were no traces of the chemical ever found within the walls of the gas chamber? When traces have been found in the walls of delousing chambers, which records indicate that the gas was used for delousing the clothing of camp inmates. This may be why a research chemist for 33 years with the DuPont Corporation, Dr. William B. Lindsay, states under oath in Canada in 1985, I have come to the conclusion that no one was willfully or purposefully killed with Zyklon B in this matter. I consider it absolutely impossible. The claim that 6 million Jews were gassed and then incinerated in ovens does not make sense when a number of crematory experts have confirmed that it takes a minimum of 2 hours to burn one human body in an incinerator, yet the Jews claim the Nazis were burning 25,000 bodies a day at Auschwitz, which only had 2 crematorium ovens. Further, the ashes generated by the crematorium of 6 million would weigh a minimum of 6,000 tons, a minimum of 1 kilogram of ash per body, yet Allied aerial reconnaissance photos revealed no piles of ash at the concentration camps. Why? No autopsy on even one Jewish body found at the concentration camps has ever proved a Jew was killed by poison gas. Teams of pathologists followed the invasion forces into Europe and did autopsy on thousands of bodies found in the camps. Dr. Larson, pathologist with the Judge Advocate General's office, led these teams and reported not one case of death by poison gas was found. Dr. John E. Gordon, who was with the United States forces, stated most deaths in concentration camps were caused not by starvation or maltreatment, but by typhus. Why are these professional medical accounts missing from the mainstream reporting on the Holocaust? If 6 million Jews died as the Jews claim, why is it that the impartial International Red Cross have claimed 271,504 prisoners, not just Jews, died in the total throughout the war and the concentration camps, which they even break down camp by camp list? Furthermore, the Red Cross reports of 1948 explains that most of the casualties were at the end of the war, as the saturation bombing by the Allies paralyzed the German transport system, and thus no food reached the camps, resulting in many inmates dying of starvation. Could this explain the pictures of undernourished inmates and emaciated corpses? A Holocaust survivor is deemed to be any Jew who lived in any country occupied or controlled by the Nazi regime, or was forced to flee because of the Nazis. On that basis, any Jew who left Europe from 1933 onwards and settled in another country is regarded as a Holocaust survivor and thus can claim reparations, despite never so much as having gone near a prison camp. Why? I'll leave the last word to Bobby Fischer, widely regarded as the greatest chess player of all time, who incidentally was Jewish. I expose the Holocaust as never having happened, totally made up. The Jews are liars. There's not a shred of truth to this Holocaust. In 2006, Ernst Zundel, now living in Germany, after being deported by Canada, is tried for Holocaust denial, facing a maximum 5-year sentence. In the lead-up to this trial, his original lawyer, Horst Mahler, is barred from representing, and during the trial, his replacement lawyer, Sylvia Stoltz, is also removed from the court and astonishingly jailed for 3.5 years in 2008. She is furthermore stripped of her license to practice law. So much for the fair judicial system in Germany, when you consider lawyers can be jailed for representing their clients. Hey, they don't call it the judicial system for nothing. The outcome of the show trial is obviously a foregone conclusion, and as expected, Ernst Zundel is jailed for the full 5-year term. Finally, in 2015, the 5th edition of Paul Peter Winter's book, The 6 Million Fact or Fiction, is released. In it, he states of the French historian, Professor Paul Rasseneur, that French anti-Nazi and resistance fighter Paul Rasseneur was jailed by the Gestapo and imprisoned in the Buchenwald concentration camp. After the war, he was elected to the French National Assembly and awarded heroism medals. He was shocked to find that others claimed that there were gas chambers at Buchenwald, something he knew was a lie because of his internment there. Rasseneur spent the rest of his life exposing the lies behind the Holocaust, and as a result, his memoirs of internment at Buchenwald are ignored by the Holocaust storytellers. The question: how long can the Jews perpetuate the Holocaust myth? The answer: not much longer. Only 5.5 million Jews lived in all of pre-war Europe. Millions survived. Where did this 6 million killed come from? American prison incinerators consume 1 body in 8 hours, yet 2 in Auschwitz were supposedly burned 25,000 a day. No German documents were ever found mentioning any plan to exterminate Jews. No mass graves were found. Lampshades made of human skin, a soap of human fat, photos of stacked bodies were all propaganda hoaxes. Most deaths in the German camps came from the last 90 days of war of typhus and starvation due to Allied saturation bombing. No piles of human ash were ever found. In conclusion, rather than the Jew-controlled governments who tell you to believe the official Holocaust narrative unless you want to face imprisonment, I present these findings to you and say, Holocaust or Holohoax, you be the judge. Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, 8th of October 2015. All right. Let's get on here. Brandon Turboville. No, 6 reasons why Russia cares so much about Syria. The potential for direct military confrontation between the United States, NATO, and Russia and Syria escalates by the day. The vast majority of Americans have little clue why the Russians would ever become involved in the crisis to begin with. Undoubtedly, most of them believe that what they are told through the mainstream media, that Russia is yet again acting aggressively in its plans for total world domination and the establishment of the Fourth Reich. For many observers in the alternative media, the understanding of the Russian move is somewhat more sophisticated but still substantially lacking. For instance, while some simply oppose the Russian involvement on the basis of not wanting to see any further escalation, others heap lavish praise upon Putin for his decision and present the Russian president as the potential leader for the world. At times, adulation borders on the cult of personality, a dangerous situation regardless of the pure motives of the individual at the center of the worship. It is true that in the recent geopolitical back and forth that has been taking place between Russia and the West, the Russians have acted entirely in self-defense, and that it has been entirely the West that has provoked the current tensions. Indeed, in the context of Russia, Iran, and Ukraine, Russia has clearly stood on the right side of history, while the United States and NATO move further and further in the opposite direction. However, it is Russia, while Russia has indeed acted and continues as the savior in Syria, Iran, and Ukraine, it's important to note that Russian foreign policy is not an act of charity, that ultimately Putin's concern is centered with the fate of Russia. Whatever the world wishes to see Putin do in Syria will be subject to the geopolitical, national, and domestic interest of Russia, a stance that once can seriously criticize any national leader for maintaining. Here are a number of reasons that Putin and Russia are so concerned with the fate of Syria. Number one is a pipeline. The West has long desired a Qatari pipeline project that would stem from the oil fields of Qatar and traverse Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and Turkey before making its way to Europe. Besides the obvious benefits of Qatar and the basic addition of another source of oil and gas to Europe, the pipeline would represent a substantial reduction in the amount of leverage Russia currently holds over Europe. As of today, Russia is the main provider of the majority of Europe's oil and gas. If the EU decides to act too provocative in its eastern regions, Ukraine, or other areas of the Russian sphere of influence, Russia has the trump card of being able to turn off the oil and gas spigot, leaving Europe in the dark and cold. Europe would then be left with a few options in the short to medium term other than to come around to Russia's way of thinking. With the development of the Qatar pipeline, however, that trump card would be removed as Europe, and then would then simply open the Qatar spigot further to make up for what was lost when the Russians cut off the oil. In any event, Russia would also be deprived of a substantial amount of oil and gas related income. Assad nixed the Qatar pipeline back in 2009 in favor of the Iran-Syria pipeline that would have seen oil and gas coming from Iran through Iraq and Syria and into Europe. While not directly beneficial to Russia's oil company, Gazprom, the pipeline was one owned and operated by Russian allies who are generally beholden to Russian support of the United Nations Security Council. Two, there's the warm weather port. The quest for warm water ports has played a major role in Russian foreign policy. Currently, Russia boasts a number of these posts in Sevastopol, Crimea, and Tartus. The Syrian port of Tartus has no doubt been a major force behind Russia's support of Assad and Syria throughout the crisis. Three, strategic influence plays a major role in the Russian decision as well. Syria has been in its sphere of influence for quite some time, but has also acted as one of the last major Russian outposts in the Middle East after the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia does not want to lose this asset and its pipeline potential, buffering qualities against Western aggression and, of course, the warm water port. Furthermore, a closer alliance with Syria portends a closer alliance with Iran, the last country on the chessboard to fall before the assault begins on Russia and China proper. Russia's alliance with Iran is a separate discussion, but suffice to say that a greater alliance with Iran is to Russia's distinct advantage, and a close alliance with Syria facilitates that needed alliance with Iran. Four is the domino theory. Russia is presumably aware of the strategy being used against it, i.e. an attempt to chip away at all nations that resist the dictates of NATO power structure, and in particular areas of Russia alliance and influence, before finally turning its sights directly on Russia. And fighting terrorism abroad, the use of Islamic fundamentalists as proxy fighter in Syria long ago raised the eyebrow of Russian leaders, if for no other reason that a number of Chechen fighters were flocking to the Middle East in order to engage in jihad. The fear was not only that they would return to Russia and begin launching new terror attacks, but that the network that controls them, Middle Eastern jihadists and Chechen variety, would begin directing their proxies to attack Russia inside Russia. Missing one here. Turkish expanses. While perhaps not the most extensive threat by any means, Turkey is attempting to spread its influence across the Middle East and Asia, a theater that includes Russia as a target as well. While Turkey has provided Yemen's service in the nation of agenda of NATO and the Anglo-Americans, it's clear that the megalomaniacs and Erdogan have pipe dreams of re-establishing the Ottoman Empire. These dreams are in reality delusions. However, these dreams make Turkey dangerous in the meantime, particularly to Russia. The attempt to promote Uyghur terrorism in Asia and around Russians' Eurasian borders and Tatar terror in Crimea is reason enough for Russia to attempt to crush Turkey's plans for Syria. let's turn our attention here to the UN-led mass migration destroying U.S. nationhood. And I believe this is coming from Art Thompson.
On the free trade deal. And realize that unless they understand that there is a conspiracy to arrest the sovereignty of the United States and destroy the independence of the American people, they're falling for these so-called free trade deals. Won't get into the particulars, but it's the same thing with immigration. Unless you understand there's a conspiracy to break down the moral and social fiber of the various countries involved in taking in these refugees, you don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. They're too stupid, is your answer to what they're doing. No, they're not stupid. There is a design to what they're doing. We all get these pictures, these heartstring tugging pictures of little kids and that sort of thing. But as we pointed out, in many of these locations in the European Union, these are very virile men. A lot of thousands of them, thousands of these virile men. They don't look like they've ever missed a meal. They're all buff, so on and so forth. But they always go after the little family, the little kids, the dead boy on the Turkish beach, that sort of thing, to tug at people's heartstring to let these others in that are never vetted. You know, we've been looking at this a long time, and it's becoming a serious problem in the European Union, but it's been going on for decades. It's been going on for decades in the United States as well, which we will show in a moment. But here out of the Wall Street Journal is refugee fight widens EU rift. And it says the European Union pushing through a plan that forces member states to take in migrants. Now, last week there was an article in the Financial Times. And it basically said to Greece, look, we'll take care of your refugee problem for you as long as you give us control over your borders. If Greece would do that, you see, they would no longer have a country. A country without borders is no longer a country, or a country that cannot control its borders. And yet the very next day, they took away that ability from every member of the EU to have this refugee resettlement scheme. And not just Greece. But it's interesting when you read some of these newspapers that most of you never read, like the Financial Times. It says some very interesting things. And, you know, I always look at 4 or 5 newspapers a day sometimes to get the real news. For instance, it says in here that the resettlement of these refugees will be only those that have come into Greece and into Italy. Now, this is 160,000 of just those that are in Greece and Italy. It doesn't count those in Austria, it doesn't count those in Croatia, doesn't count those in Hungary, and that kind of thing. So this is only a certain segment of these resettlements. It's only a portion of the problem that's getting the headlines. The rest of it is apparently being ignored, and they keep coming in. The other thing is, too, for instance, here's one out of the Washington Post. And the Washington Post always tells the truth, right? Anyway, they say the proponents of the plan acknowledged Tuesday that it was just the first step to address the much bigger crisis, according to the UN Refugee Agency. And that more than 477,000 people had arrived. So they're resettling this 160,000, but they acknowledge nearly 500,000. Then in addition to that, they say Germany's National Railway Company announced Tuesday that it was suspending railway service to Austria because the trains have been overwhelmed with refugees. Perhaps you've seen some of these shots where they're actually pushing people in through the windows to pack these trains with refugees who don't pay. And so I pity the poor people sitting in the seats. They paid for their ticket, and all of a sudden these kids are being tossed through the window at them. That sort of thing. Maybe some of you have seen those pictures. Despite Hungary's opposition of the asylum seekers, a government spokesman said Tuesday that his country would abide by the rules, by the plan. So in other words, it doesn't matter whether they're for it or against it, they'll abide by this. This is a compulsory decision, and we are going to respect it. So in other words, the EU has come down and made it mandatory for all these countries to bring in these refugees. So much for sovereignty, so much for controlling your borders, so much for independence. It's gone in the European Union. And this is the entity that politicians in Washington, D.C. and Obama want us to get involved and integrate with them into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And, excuse me, the Transatlantic Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership is where they want us to do the same with China. With that as the first step. That's another story. They say that that when you are in Vienna, you can go anywhere, according to a refugee from Aleppo, Syria. So in other words, they're told, or that's the word on the street, if you can just get to Vienna, Austria, from there you can go anywhere. And that's part of the problem. I just got home from Vienna a couple of weeks ago, and believe me, the Muslim garb, the Muslim people are all over the place. Whole neighborhoods are nothing but Muslims. You know, and now they want the United States to bring some of these in. And you can go to all the government websites and find out the requirements they have and the benefits these people will get when they get here. Now, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, these benefits that they say officially online are not quite accurate. They're bad enough, but they don't go quite as far as the reality of the situation, which I'll get into in just a moment. Here, for instance, and this is nothing new now. Keep in mind, we've already said this is nothing new. Here is something from 2 years ago, over 2 years ago. Obama administration considering resettling Syrian refugees in the United States. And these are the states where they may go. And it's an article about that. Now, the interesting thing is, it says the State Department is ready to reconsider the idea, an official from the department said of the administration, if the administration receives a formal request from the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. Now, this is the problem that most people kind of gloss over when they read these articles. These refugee programs are actually overseen by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. They're the ones who decide who are eligible for inclusion into your country. Now, just as an idea, Antonio Gutierrez is the past president of the Socialist International and a hardcore Marxist. He is the head of the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. This is the guy we're going to trust? Guess who the main man in the United States that works with these people are? It's Anthony Lake, who the John Birch Society stopped from being named the head of the CIA because of his communist Marxist background. And he's the American that's going to be doing this. We don't vet these people at all. We are getting these people from the United Nations. And this article is 2 years old. But we've been looking at this for a long time, my file alone on it. And you can go through decade after decade, year after year. Here's one out of Parade magazine, from the Middle East to the Midwest. And it shows, it's an article about people coming in, these Muslims from these war-torn places, not being vetted. We have no idea of who they are. Here's another one, and this one was U.S. to help resettle more Syrian refugees. And this was a year ago. So this is not something new, ladies and gentlemen. We're just now beginning to see what's going on. And it's not just Syria. It's not just Iraq. It's not just Iran and Afghanistan and everything else. Getting too excited here. But you get this like out of the Times Digest, the New York Times, of over 2 years ago. It's an article on Mexican villages that have been cleaned out because they've all come into the United States. You know, that these Mexican villages used to be vibrant places full of people. They're half deserted, some of them now, because they came north. So this immigration problem is much bigger than people realize. We are allowing people to come into our country that we have no idea of their backgrounds, from war-torn areas, simply because they lost. Keep that in mind. You know, not all of the guys that lose are good guys. If this rebel beats that rebel, or this communist beats that communist, whatever, we bring them on into the United States. It is nuts. But it is only nuts if you think it's stupidity. It is design. These things are designed to break down the American society, and it's high time we force Congress to finally get some guts and stand up and do something about it. Until next week, we'll see you then.
All right. That was a statement from the John Birch Society. And we'll move on here.
Well, welcome back again this week. We see the issue of free trade finally getting traction. We hope it's not too late. We've been on this issue for literally years. We've been in the front of everyone relative to the dangers of the TPP and the TTIP, fast track, etc. Now what we see is mailings going out all over the United States trying to convince Republicans to get a hold of their representatives, their Republican representatives, to get them to vote for the TPP and trade authority. Now here it says, who should be the leader in international trade, America or China? And then on the back it says, if America doesn't show leadership on trade, China will. And what this is a propaganda piece that is a lie. Now, I don't know if it's a conscious lie by this group or not, or whether it's just done out of ignorance. Because a lot of people are being told that the TPP is an American initiative, while the FTAAP is not. That's a Chinese issue. And yet let me read you something that we had intercepted from emails out of the White House some time back. And I've read this before, but it takes on more significance now with them trying to convince everyone that the TPP is an American initiative and the FTAAP is actually something the Chinese are promoting. This was on whitehouse.gov on 2010. Quote, based on the results of this work, we have agreed that now is the time for APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Council, to translate FTAAP from an aspirational to a more concrete vision. Now, keep in mind, the FTAAP is supposedly the Chinese initiative. To a more concrete vision. To that end, we instruct APEC to take concrete steps toward realization of an FTAAP, which is a major instrument to further APEC's regional economic integration agenda. Now, the FTAAP includes almost every Asian country and North America and a few Latin American countries. And its purpose is to, as they say, economically integrate the region. That's not free trade. Economic integration goes way beyond free trade. And by the way, have you ever noticed the ridiculousness of the two votes on Friday? Supposedly, one vote is to enhance the job market, to bring more jobs home, to have more jobs in the United States. But the other vote was to subsidize people that are going to lose their jobs due to free trade. Does this make any sense? Let's get back to the quote. We believe that an FTAAP should be pursued as a comprehensive free trade agreement by developing and building on ongoing regional undertakings such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, amongst others. So basically what they're saying is that the TPP is only going to be a transition, a first step towards encompassing all of Asia through the FTAAP. Here's another one, by the way. And it says, and this is a report called Understanding the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Now, Peterson used to be the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he runs this outfit. But a very interesting quote in Chapter 6, moving from TTP to the FTAAP. Quote, the current TPP architects envision building an eventual FTAAP on the comprehensive foundations of the TPP Accord, with other APEC countries joining the pact in coming years. So what we see when they're saying one is American and the other is Chinese, you can't believe it, because it's the same thing in incremental steps towards the common goal of economically integrating the entire Pacific Rim. And that's what it's all about. Here's another one, and this is from the Chinese themselves, and I'm never quite sure how to pronounce Z, but it's Xinghao in December 12th of last year. The goal is to build upon President Obama's recent visit to China and meetings with President Xi Jinping, when they agreed to deepen economic ties and enhance bilateral agreements. Foreman, who is the trade representative, said during the conference call that the future of bilateral relationship will depend on building mutual interest and respect through unlocking opportunity, expanding trade, creating a level playing field for businesses, and lower barriers to investment. So while they're telling us, on one hand, this is a battle between China and the United States, our own government is getting in bed with China to enhance all of this economic integration with the Pacific Rim. Here's another one from the Council on Foreign Relations. And this paper is called North America, Time for a New Focus. Now, you know, for years we were involved in trying to stop the North American Union, and we're very successful at it. We put a lot of money, time, and effort into this. And as a result, we were able to slow it down drastically. But now they're coming back, and Obama, behind the scenes, are doing things a salami slice at a time to put together the North American Union. But in this report, it shows that this will simply be part of these free trade agreements that economically integrate the Pacific, the United States, and the Atlantic all in one deal. And so we're moving towards, again, using all this free trade to merge our government with other governments into a singular country. First North America, then perhaps the Pacific, perhaps the Atlantic. They're moving towards all three at the same time. Here's another one from the Center for Transatlantic Relations, a transatlantic pivot to Asia. And in here they basically outline that NATO will be utilized to integrate a world government from Europe into Asia. They're already talking, as we've said before with NATO, to Japan, the Philippines, and other countries to integrate them into NATO. And so they're even bringing that into the equation. Not just free trade, but so-called war on terrorism and aggression and that kind of thing. And if you go into all these things, I've got just gobs of stuff here to show that this is not free trade. This is economic integration. It's economic integration to the point of where we would lose our sovereignty and the Constitution would become passé. So the other things that we see here are other regional groupings from the China Trade Extra, that they're saying that they are going to have an involvement in Europe, in the EU, and that sort of thing. They say that this is a competition between the United States and China, and yet we see the Chinese and the United States military cooperating more and more, joint naval exercises, and that sort of business. So on and on and on, it all takes on a very strange appearance if indeed This is between the United States and China. All the documentation shows that this is the propaganda. The reality is integration of the Chinese and the United States in the Pacific and into Europe itself. Even the EU has called for China to be involved in various treaties that they're negotiating with the United States. It's a very dangerous thing. Again, I invite all of you to go to